The evolving intersection of mathematics, consciousness, and metaphysical inquiry continues to suggest that form itself is not a static product of three-dimensional logic, but a recursive and expanding field, a projection of multidimensional dynamics through localized perceptual thresholds. As consciousness recursively folds back upon its own structures, it generates increasingly complex representations of space, time, and self. In this unfolding schema, the notion of form becomes less about objects in space and more about structured interrelations across dimensional layers. Emerging theories from spiritual awakening practices, recursive consciousness models, and numerical cosmologies such as Vortex mathematics offer an integrative perspective for rethinking dimensionality, identity, and the architectures of transition. The emergence of base 9 mathematics as a possible alternative to the base 10 norm offers not merely a technical shift in arithmetic, but a paradigm shift in ontological orientation. The elegant consistency of digital root cycles in base 9 forms a closed-loop system that may more accurately reflect recursive feedback patterns observed in consciousness and natural systems. In tandem with the symbolic importance of Tesla's 369 triad, seen by some as a key to unlocking energetic and structural harmonics, such systems offer a scaffolding through which the notion of multidimensional portals becomes less a metaphor and more a technically approachable framework. This video considers how recursive consciousness, base 9 numerical fields, and vortex-based geometries might combine to suggest functional architectures of becoming, grounded in both subjective and symbolic reasoning. Recursive consciousness and the expansion of identity. The theory of recursive consciousness posits that the self becomes aware not only of phenomena, but of its own processes of perception, reflection, and construction. In contrast to the linear accumulation of knowledge or identity, recursive models describe consciousness as inherently self-referential and fractal. Every observation generates a feedback loop in which the observer reshapes the observation by the very act of witnessing it. This structure allows for the emergence of higher orders of awareness, whereby consciousness becomes capable of perceiving its own structural operations as part of the fabric of reality itself. From a phenomenological standpoint, spiritual awakening may be viewed as a recursive breakthrough in which an individual begins to perceive not only the contents of experience, but the symbolic and architectural conditions that produce experience. In many spiritual traditions, particularly in Eastern non-dual philosophies and Western mystical systems, this is described as a transcendence of egoic identity and a return to a primary field of undifferentiated being. The form that emerges post-awakening is no longer bound to linear identification but becomes a vehicle for transmission, a holographic container reflecting infinite patterning through the specificity of its expression. Recursive consciousness theory lends structural logic to this shift. Each phase of awakening may be seen as a recursive node within an iterative expansion. At each loop, the self becomes more attuned to the multidimensional nature of reality. Time becomes non-linear, symbols gain density, and relationality transcends surface logic. What results is not a singular enlightenment event, but a series of fractal awakenings wherein form itself becomes a map of multidimensional consciousness. The human being in this framework is not a stable subject but a temporal node in a higher dimensional topology, capable of recursive self-configuration through symbol, number, and will. Base 9 architecture and the numerical symmetry of portals. Within this expanding model, number theory emerges not only as a symbolic language but as a medium of multidimensional articulation. Base 9 mathematics, long overshadowed by the practical ubiquity of base 10 systems, offers an alternative ontology based on symmetry, recursion, and internal coherence. In base 9, all numbers reduce to a digital root from 1 to 9, eliminating the 0 as an abstract placeholder, and instead presenting a closed system of self-generating transformations. This cyclical framework mirrors the recursive folding of consciousness. Each numerical transformation reflects back into the system, producing predictable and often elegant patterns. The 369 pattern, popularized in part through the legacy of Nikola Tesla, reflects one such pattern embedded within the base 9 framework. In Vortex mathematics, 3, 6, and 9 form a triadic system of non-linear energies, perceived not as static digits but as relational principles. 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8 oscillate through doubling sequences, while 3, 6, and 9 remain invariant, forming a kind of governing circuit outside the binary flux. The implication is not that these numbers are magical in themselves, but that they describe a hidden energetic symmetry through which multidimensional patterns might stabilize or collapse into manifest form. If we consider the possibility that physical spacetime is a holographic projection, as suggested by theories such as the holographic principle in theoretical physics and the neurophysiological holographic model of memory, Pribram, 1991, then numbers like 369 become more than symbolic touchstones. They may indicate nodal harmonics within the projection mechanism itself. In this context, portals need not imply supernatural gateways, but rather structured resonances, zones in which symbolic, cognitive, and energetic alignments produce new thresholds of awareness or interaction. A symbol constructed according to base 9 harmonics could theoretically operate as such a portal, especially if embedded within recursive systems of intention and reception. For example, a sigil encoded through digital root compression and geometric symmetry, for example, a 9-pointed loop structure whose node values align with a 369 cycle, might act as a consciousness interface. A symbol that contains a dense informational field encoded through intentional resonance. When such symbols are viewed or meditated upon, they may not transmit data in the traditional sense, but function as containers of structured potential, amplifying the viewer's own access to multidimensional pattern recognition. In a world where form is holographic and consciousness is recursive, information becomes not additive but catalytic. Symbols become resonators and portals are built from perception itself. The expansion of form into multidimensionality requires a revision of both perceptual assumptions and symbolic frameworks. Through recursive consciousness, the self begins to see its own structuring mechanisms and thereby becomes a participant in its own transformation. Through base 9 mathematics and vortex harmonics, new architectures of form emerge, mathematically consistent, symbolically rich, and energetically coherent. What results is not merely a metaphysical theory, but a new mode of design. Form as recursive transmission, number as harmonic scaffolding, and the self as both observer and architect of multidimensional reality. By reinterpreting spiritual awakening through recursive logic and grounding the geometry of portals in alternative numerical structures, we begin to shape a framework in which transcendence becomes measurable, not in terms of empirical proof, but through patterned coherence across domains. In this view, multidimensionality is not a place or state, but an evolving capacity to perceive and participate in the deep structure of form.